Think about how devotion is usually understood. Most people believe God is reached through rituals. Some believe spirituality belongs only to sages, priests and scholars. Some think divine grace comes only through sacred chants, strict purity, temple discipline and religious knowledge. But every once in a while, history produces a devotee who completely destroys human definition of worship itself. A devotee who cannot read a single scriptures, yet reaches God directly. A man born far away from royal society, who becomes immortal in spirituality. A hunter from the forest, whose devotion becomes so terrifyingly pure that even Lord Shiva himself became emotional. Now imagine ancient South India centuries ago. Dense forest stretched endlessly across mountains and rivers. Tribal communities survived through hunting and nature. Far away from cities and temple traditions, people lived simple but dangerous lives. And during this time, according to Shiva traditions, a divine prophecy was spoken. It is said that Lord Subramanya himself declared that soon a child would take birth upon earth. A child whose devotion towards Shiva would surpass ordinary human understanding. Not a king, not a saint, not a scholar, but a hunter. A devotee whose love would become greater than pain itself. And somewhere deep inside those forests stood the sacred Shiva Linga hidden in silence. A place worshipped through rituals, purity and discipline. But destiny had already decided something extraordinary. Because one day, that Shiva Linga would receive an offering unlike anything in spiritual history. Not flowers, not gold, not jewels, but human eyes. And what makes this story unforgettable is that the offering was not made out of fear or desire for blessings. It was made out of love. A love so absolute that a man became ready to destroy himself just to stop Shiva from suffering. And today we are entering one of the most emotional, terrifying and spiritually powerful stories in Indian history. This is not just mythology, this is the story of a devotee who proved that pure devotion is greater than every ritual in existence. That devotee was Bhakta Kannappa. Namaskara everybody. To understand Kannappa's greatness, we first need to understand why he was born. Long before Kannappa entered this world, divine forces had already spoken about him. In the beautiful region of Vudukuru, there once lived a powerful hunter tribe. Their leader was a fearless man named Naga. He was strong, respected and unmatched in hunting. Naga was admired throughout the forest. And soon he married a woman named Datta. Their marriage filled the tribe with happiness. But as years passed, one sorrow slowly consumed their lives. They had no child. Every festival reminded them of their loneliness, every prayer carried the same pain, and finally with complete sincerity, both of them surrendered themselves before Lord Subramanya. They did not pray for wealth, not for power, not for status, but only for a child. And then something extraordinary happened. One day, while Naga was deeply absorbed in worship, he slowly fell asleep before the deity. And in his dream, Lord Subramanya himself appeared. The divine form radiated brilliance as the Lord spoke. Naga, your devotion has pleased me. Very soon you will be blessed with a son. And that child will become one of the greatest devotees of Lord Shiva. His name will remain immortal for ages. The dream ended, but the prophecy soon became reality. After some time, Datta gave birth to a baby boy. He was named Tinnan. Now think about the significance of this. Subramanya did not choose a prince or a spiritually educated sage. He chose a hunter born deep inside forest. And from childhood itself, Tinnan grew up among bows, arrows, wild animals and survival. He learned how to track prey through forest. He learned how to fight dangerous beasts without fear. As years passed, he became a legendary hunter whose speed and accuracy were unmatched. But beneath all that strength, his heart remained innocent. And this innocence would later become the foundation of his devotion. Because Tinnan never pretended to be something he was not. He spoke honestly, he lived honestly, and one day destiny slowly began guiding him towards Shiva himself. But before Tinnan could become Kannappa, something had to awaken devotion inside him. One day, while hunting with his friends inside the forest, they began speaking about a sacred Shiva temple nearby. There's an ancient Shiva temple in the forest, they said. People believe Lord Shiva personally blesses devotees there. Hearing this, Tinnan laughed openly. How can intelligent people worship a stone? He mocked, but his friends replied with devotion. Do not insult Shiva, Tinnan. Even animals attained liberation through devotion at the sacred place. The moment he heard this, Tinnan stopped talking. Animals attained liberation? Tell me everything. And there deep inside the forest, they narrated the story of Sri Kalahasti. Long ago, beneath the open sky stood a self-manifested Vayu Linga. Nobody understood its greatness. But one day, a tiny spider saw the Shiva Linga and became filled with devotion. Wanting to protect Shiva from sunlight and rain, the spider carefully built a web around the Linga. Later, a serpent named Kala arrived carrying a precious Nagamani gem upon its head. Seeing the web, the serpent removed it and worshipped Shiva by placing the divine gem upon the Linga. Then came a great elephant named Asti. When it saw the gem, it removed it gently, brought water in its trunk, performed Abhisheka, and decorated the Shiva Linga with flowers. Every single day this cycle repeated. The spider rebuilt the web, the serpent placed the gem, the elephant removed the gem and offered flowers. Each creature believed its devotion was the purest, and one day, devotion turned into conflict. The enraged serpent entered the elephant's trunk. In unbearable pain, the elephant crashed itself against a giant rock. The serpent died, the elephant died, and the spider too lost its life. But at that very moment, Lord Shiva appeared before them. Pleased by their sincerity, granted all three moksha. And from then onwards, that sacred place became known as Sri Kalahasti. Shri from the spider, Kala from the serpent, and Asti from the great elephant. When Tinnan heard this story, something changed inside him. For the first time in his life, his heart became restless. If animals could love that stone so deeply, then what kind of stone is it really? That single question began changing his destiny forever. One day, during a hunting expedition, Tinnan finally arrived at the sacred temple. There were no crowds, no grand ceremonies, only silence and the presence of Shiva. And the moment Tinnan looked upon the Vayulinga for the very first time, something exploded inside him emotionally. He could not explain it intellectually, he did not understand spirituality philosophically, but emotionally became attached to Shiva instantly. The man who mocked God his entire life suddenly stood frozen before the Shiva Linga with tears in his eyes. Without even realizing it, his hands folded together. Then suddenly unable to control himself, Tinnan ran forward and hugged the Shiva Linga tightly. Forgive me, Shivaya, I never came to see you all these years. His voice trembled like a child speaking to his father. Then immediately he asked, have you eaten anything? That question alone revealed the innocence of his devotion. He rushed back into the forest, brought freshly hunted meat and searched for water. At first he tried carrying water with his hands, but before reaching the temple, everything spilled away. Then suddenly he got an idea. He filled his mouth with water and carried meat in his hands. And there with complete innocence, he performed Abhisheka by pouring water from his mouth upon the Shiva Linga. Then he lovingly placed the meat before Shiva. But when nothing worked, Tinnan became worried. Then he tasted the meat himself and selected what he believed was the finest piece. Now imagine this moment carefully. Everything Tinnan did appeared completely impure according to temple customs. But every action carried pure love, every offering carried sincerity, every word carried emotional surrender. And then something miraculous happened. A divine light emerged from Shiva Linga. Eyes appeared, hands appeared, and before Tinnan's eyes, Lord Shiva himself accepted the offering. At that moment, Tinnan's happiness became uncontrollable. And from that day onward, his life completely belonged to Shiva. But now another devotee entered the story. A Brahmin named Shiva Gochara regularly worshipped at the same temple according to strict rituals and sacred traditions. Every 15 days he travelled long distances to perform proper worship using flowers, bilwa leaves, sacred chants and traditional discipline. But one day after entering the temple, he became horrified. Meat surrounded the Shiva Linga. Bones lay scattered nearby. Footprints covered the sacred floor. Who has done this to my Shiva? He shouted angrily. Furious Shiva Gochara cleaned the temple completely and performed traditional worship once again. But the same thing continued repeatedly. Finally, unable to tolerate it anymore, he decided to secretly observe the temple, and what he witnessed completely shocked him. He saw Tinnan arrive carrying meat lovingly for Shiva. He watched him pour water from his mouth because he believed Shiva might be thirsty. He watched him speak to Shiva like a son speaking to his father. Shiva Gochara, this looked unforgivable. But then something extraordinary happened. Far away in Kailasa, Goddess Parvati noticed Shiva smiling. Swami, she asked, one worships you through sacred rituals while the other worships you through innocent love. Tell me whose devotion is greater? Lord Shiva smiled mysteriously. Tomorrow you will receive your answer. And then Shiva decided to test Tinnan's devotion himself. The next day, Shiva Gochara arrived at the temple early in the morning carrying bilva leaves and sacred offerings. As always, he began performing traditional worship with discipline and concentration. And then suddenly something miraculous happened. Two divine eyes appeared upon the Shivalinga itself. The moment Shiva Gochara witnessed it, his body trembled with excitement and devotion. He cried emotionally, but in the very next moment, his happiness turned into terror. Blood suddenly began flowing continuously from one of the divine eyes. Shiva Gochara froze in fear. His hands trembled uncontrollably that he could no longer continue the worship properly. Unable to understand what was happening, Shiva Gochara stepped back in horror and hid nearby, watching the Shivalinga anxiously from a distance. At that exact moment, Tinnan arrived carrying meat happily as usual. But the moment he looked at the Shivalinga, his entire world shattered. Now understand this carefully. To priest, the Shivalinga symbolized divinity, but to Tinnan, Shiva was alive. And at that moment, he believed his beloved Shivaya was suffering terribly. Panic consumed him instantly. He ran desperately into the forest searching for medicinal herbs. He crushed leaves and applied them carefully, but nothing worked. The blood continued flowing endlessly. And then suddenly, a terrifying thought entered his mind. If Shiva's eye is damaged, then I will give him mine. Without even a second of hesitation, Tinnan took the sharp tip of his arrow and removed one of his own eyes. Now imagine the brutality of that moment. Blood pouring from his face, unimaginable pain, yet not even a second of hesitation. Because for him, Shiva's suffering mattered more than his own body. And then with trembling hands, he placed his eye upon Shiva's bleeding eye. Instantly the bleeding stopped. Relief filled his heart immediately. My Shivaya is no longer suffering. But moments later, blood began flowing from the second eye of Shivalinga. Now the situation became even more terrifying. Tinnan had already lost one eye. If he sacrificed the second, he would become permanently blind. But devotion had already erased fear from his mind. He smiled softly and immediately prepared to remove his second eye as well. But suddenly he realized something horrifying. Once he removed his final eye, how would he know where to place it? And then Tinnan did something unforgettable. To mark the exact location of Shiva's bleeding eye, he placed his foot upon the Shivalinga itself. According to temple traditions, touching the deity with one's foot was considered deeply disrespectful. But at that moment, Tinnan was beyond rituals entirely. He was no longer thinking about rules, he was only thinking about Shiva's suffering. Then once again, using the sharp tip of the arrow, he prepared to remove his second eye as well. Blood flowed endlessly from both sides of his face. His body weakened rapidly, yet his devotion remained unshaken. Now imagine that terrifying scene. A hunter standing before Shiva, half blind, covered in blood, still smiling through devotion. Nearby, even Shiva Gochara, the priest hiding secretly, became overwhelmed with fear and shock. Unable to bear the intensity of what he was witnessing, he fainted on the spot. Because humanity itself had never witnessed devotion at this level. And just before Tinnan could remove his second eye, a divine hand suddenly stopped him. It was Shiva himself. At that moment, Mahadeva appeared physically before Tinnan in his true divine form. The forest trembled, the atmosphere transformed, and with immense love, Shiva held Tinnan before he collapsed completely from blood loss and exhaustion. Then Shiva spoke words that immortalized Tinnan forever. You never once thought about yourself. Even while blood flowed from your own eyes, your only concern was my pain. You're my truest devotee. And instantly, Shiva restored both of Tinnan's eyes. The hunter slowly opened them once again, and for the first time in his life, he witnessed the real divine form of Mahadeva standing before him. The moment he saw Shiva, tears of overwhelming devotion began flowing endlessly from his eyes. Not pain, not fear, pure spiritual ecstasy. He embraced Shiva completely while crying. But the divine moment was not yet complete. Lord Shiva then asked lovingly, "Tell me, what blessing do you desire?" And Tinnan gave an answer that revealed the purity of his heart completely. "Shivaya, seeing you itself is the greatest blessing of my life. But I have one wish. I want to see you together with Mother Parvati." The moment he made this request, Goddess Parvati herself appeared beside Lord Shiva. Together, Shiva and Parvati blessed the hunter devotee lovingly. Then Goddess Parvati spoke words that became eternal. "You gave both your eyes for my husband. From this day onward, through ages and generations, the world shall remember you as Bhakta Kannappa." From that day onward, Tinnan became immortal as Kannappa. According to Shiva traditions, the story reaches an even deeper spiritual conclusion. Shiva was so moved by Kannappa's devotion that he granted him the highest spiritual liberation possible. Not heaven, not wealth, not power, moksha itself. It is said Lord Shiva united Kannappa within himself eternally. Now think about the meaning of this. A tribal hunter who knew no scriptures reached the highest spiritual state possible purely through devotion. This completely shattered human assumptions about spirituality. Because Kannappa proved something extraordinary. God does not measure social status. He does not measure education. He does not measure ritual perfection or religious appearances. He measures sincerity. And when devotion becomes absolute, the distance between human and divine disappears entirely. The story of Bhakta Kannappa is not just mythology. It is one of the most powerful spiritual lessons ever told. Because rituals can be memorized, prayers can be repeated mechanically, religious appearances can be performed publicly, but pure devotion cannot be faked. Kannappa did not understand philosophy, he did not know sacred mantras, he did not seek fame, heaven or recognition. He simply loved Shiva, and perhaps that is why Shiva himself appeared before him. That is why even today Bhakta Kannappa remains one of the greatest symbols of devotion in Indian spiritual history.